do all that I can to meet the demands of the taxpayers and the voters who put me in office to keep them and their families safe.
All right, well, Sheriff Daniels, thank you for meeting with Clay Citizens Voice today. We have some questions about the things that are going on with the school board, Clay County Sheriff's Office, and the new police force that is being developed by the Clay County School Board.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us a little bit of insight to the collaboration that took place between the Clay County Sheriff's Office and the local community leaders for your budget?
Go back and let me give you some definitions, because there's some confusion on the definitions. So SRO stands for School Resource Officer. A school resource officer is a certified sworn law enforcement officer that does not work for the schools, the school district, if you will. They are either a police officer with a municipality. In Clay County's case, it would be Orange Park Police Department or Grand Cove Springs Police Department, or Clay County Sheriff's Office deputy that is working in a school. That's a school resource officer. A school safety officer, which the acronym would be SSO, which the school district superintendent and school board use in all their terminology, is actually a certified sworn law enforcement officer who is a school board employee. In Clay County, those individuals don't exist, but I don't think the district or its personnel understand the true definition of law. And so they've somehow misinterpreted what SSO means, and they're applying that to what we know in the law as a guardian, which is a school district employee whose primary job is not to facilitate instruction, who has been given some training, some extensive training in the application of use of force and discretionary shooting through the sheriff's office and certified by me to be guardians. So there's SROs, SSOs, and guardians. So last year around April, we as in the Board of County Commissioners, the school board members, the superintendent, and myself, we met a couple of times, and we had conversations based on a bill that produced legislation that required us as in Clay County and other jurisdictions across the state to have sworn law enforcement officers or SSOs, SROs, or guardians in our school systems to protect the children. So our current setup was, in the high schools, I had SROs. Then the conversation was, what would be the cost to have SROs in all the schools? I'm talking about high schools, junior high schools, and elementary schools. What was proposed back then was a $5.6 million first year cost. And that number was derived from the average cost of a deputy plus benefits and the capital, which is the different pieces of equipment like laptop, vehicle. That totaled out to $101,000. That was the number that we used as our baseline. And we used that number and multiplied it by the number that we thought we would need for the sheriff's office to staff up a chain of command, lieutenant, sergeants, deputies, relief component, and an investigator to meet the requirements of the law. Since that time, the school board decided to pull in the municipalities, which wasn't a bad idea. And so Green Cove Springs Police Department and Orange Park Police Department took over the schools that are in their jurisdiction. So the proposed number that we gave in April of 2018, those numbers decreased because we gave those numbers based on the sheriff's office taking over all the schools.
Right.
And because any number of schools that are taken away from that equation means that those numbers go down. So we had conversations on what the best use of money and use of staffing would look like. Bottom line, I called it the golden standard. The gold standard meaning the best standard would be to have sheriff's office members covering all of our schools.
Right.
Because that's what we do for a living. We're law enforcement officers. And because of the cost was outside what anybody had money to support, then the school district agreed to use the sheriff's office in the high schools and junior high schools. And the money that was received from the state, a little over $1.9 million, was used to underwrite that cost, to have the deputies in the high schools and junior high schools. And what was done on the elementary schools was we used guardians. So we trained up a sufficient amount of guardians, and those men and women were put in charge of the elementary schools. So we fast forward to a conversation that was had on the third floor in the sheriff's office, and we're just kind of finalizing things. And I told the superintendent at the time, I said, you know, when there's sufficient amount of dollars to underwrite the entire complement of schools being covered by a sworn deputy, then the guardian program was going to be off the table, because I didn't see it as a necessity at the time.
Right.
Because if you have the money to cover having sworn deputies in the schools, then there's no need for the guardian piece. Right. So we fast forward a little further, and on our ballot, we voted for a 1 millage increase. That was us, we being taxpayers and voters in Clay County. What was represented was that 1 mil increase, which would net about 10 million plus or minus a few dollars per year for the next 4 years, that money would be used to fund having SROs in all the schools. And the balance of that money that was left over would be used for other operational expenses. The district defined those other operational expenses as either hardening of schools or to move in the direction of hardening of schools. Now, to the credit of the district, to fund up target hardening for all the schools, that's a major undertaking. And even if you applied all of the millage increase dollars, that's still just a drop in the bucket to harden those schools.
What do you mean by harden?
Harden means to put security measures in place that would mitigate off-campus individuals from coming onto campus and committing acts of violence. Well, to harden a school, you have fencing, single-point entries, doors that are able to be locked, and unauthorized people can't access areas that they're not supposed to, i.e. walk onto campus from off-campus and place our kids at risk. That's target hardening.
Okay.
So we fast forward to the workup of the district pursuing the idea of how to apply the 1 millage increase dollars in the years to come. Through rumor mill, I heard that the district was exploring the idea of starting up their own police department, which is, for those who get upset about that, it's under the scope of what they have the authority to do as a district. They can either use SROs, which are already defined, municipal officers or deputies, or they could stand up their own law enforcement agency and have a school board police department. So the other night, they actually voted on that. They actually voted on the different options that were presented to them, financial options that were presented to them as a school board body by the superintendent. Those numbers, I heard one of the school board members ask about where those numbers came from. The superintendent said he got those numbers from the CFO of the Clay County Sheriff's Office. Well, if you go back to the planning portion of the district starting up their own police department, the Sheriff's Office was not included in any of those discussions. I don't know if any law enforcement was, but I know that the Sheriff's Office was not. So my mindset was, when I heard all this discussion, was to start up a law enforcement agency is a major undertaking. And there's a lot that goes into the buildup of doing that. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that just takes a couple of months to pull off. You're talking about hiring quite a significant amount of people. Now, the burden that places on the taxpayers is this. The taxpayers agreed to pay additional taxes through their millage increase to underwrite a thing. And when the district made a decision to remove the sheriff's office from that equation, that means that those men and women who are a part of that existing program have to now be absorbed back under the umbrella of the Clay County Sheriff's Office and the budget. That cost will be roughly $1.9 million. So now, to absorb those folks, I have to now go to the Board of County Commissioners and ask them to dip into taxpayers' funds for an additional $1.9 million, because those are dollars that the district was paying to have those deputies in the school system. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So if they're not going to pay that, i.e. they're not going to be factored into the equation, then now the taxpayers are going to be burdened again with an additional 1.9, because the entity that was paying for them is no longer paying for them. Although in the grand scheme of things, it's still taxpayers' dollars on both sides of that fence. One being the money that funds up the district, that's taxpayers' dollars. Money that funds up the sheriff's office, that's taxpayers' dollars. So if I'm asking for additional dollars because I'm absorbing additional staffing that wasn't budgeted into this year's budget, I'm still causing a situation that's double tapping the citizenry for additional funds when it could go in a different direction and that not be the case. I wish we had been consulted on that. I've said that before. And we're still postured as a sheriff's office to entertain being part of the equation to help keep our kids safe. You know, one thing of note that I noticed when I attended the school board meeting was that everything revolved around money and the conversation about money. Most of the board members, and it's out there, the link is out there on the district webpage to be viewed. The discussion was about fiscal responsibility and money. But nobody really made a big deal about the safety and security of the kids. That's the most important thing. Nobody asked the sheriff's office, with these sheriffs sitting right there over a 4-hour period, roughly 4-hour period, what's your input on all of this? And the disturbing part of that meeting was the fact that motions were made and either not seconded, so it failed, or didn't get a unanimous or majority vote. So they kept forcing, as a body, they kept forcing an issue that kept falling on its face until ultimately the language was massaged in a way that it got a majority decision. One thing that I found notably interesting was the fact that a few of the school board members, I call them by name, the chair, Mary Bola, and Ashley Gilhousen, both spoke about the citizens voting to have a $1 million increase to have school resource officers in the school, and they didn't want to deviate from delivering what they said they were going to do. What I would have said had I gotten up to the podium would have been, you can still, you as a body, the district can get to where you're trying to go by starting up a police department. It doesn't have to be before the next school year. We as a sheriff's office, we can staff up whatever we need to staff up for the duration of time that we need to for it to transition well, and they can then stand up their police department smoothly without feeling rushed, and then we could, as partners, help them get to where they're trying to go. Because unbeknownst to a lot of people, you know, law enforcement is not just putting on a uniform and having some training and going out there and fighting crime. There's a training component to that. There's an investigative component to that. You have support components to that, like the dispatch center, how the communications between the law enforcement and the communications center, how will that look? Crimes are going to happen on school property, and I think that, and this is just my opinion, the school board might have been short-sighted in thinking 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. They don't understand that it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week responsibility. So on a Saturday night, if the school gets broken into, whose jurisdiction is that? A school board police jurisdiction. and a school board police officer has to respond. You can't say, okay, when school's in, the police department has it. When school's out, then we'll give it to somebody, farm those duties out to somebody else. Not unlike if Orange Park or Green Cove Springs has an issue that surfaces up at 1 a.m. in the morning, they don't go, all right, Sheriff's Office, y'all got it now, but we got it during the daytime. The novice would be short-sighted and not think about the 24/7 coverage. A novice would not consider the fact that there are recertification elements to law enforcement, that there are retraining elements, mandatory retraining elements, that there are staffing levels that are best practice in law enforcement, that there are property and evidence storehousing of information and criminal intelligence, and the list just goes on and on and on, that the novice wouldn't think about because they're not a law enforcement professional. That's why I said that they were short-sighted, and I wish they would have came to us as partners, because as partners and fellow stakeholders in the safety and security of our kids, we make far better partners than an outsider making side comments.
Is it too late to fix this?
No, it's never too late. Really, I think a lot of people, there's some conversation. Some people are unhappy about the decision that was made by the school board. Now, there's couple of factions out there. Some who say, well, the school board had already decided well in advance that they were going to go in the direction of having a police department. Whereas another side goes, from a fiscal responsibility aspect, they made a decision based on numbers that they were provided, and the best option was the option that they went with. A lot of parents are upset by the decision that was made, and I want our kids kept safe, just like the parents want their kids kept safe. And I can't, I said this publicly, I can't allow the sheriff's office to idly stand by and allow the district to fail, because that's a lofty goal to say we're going to stand up a police department. And here we are in February, and we're talking about standing up a police department from the ground up by the beginning of the school year, which is only 5 or 6 months away. Those are lofty goals, and it requires a lot of infrastructure. It just requires a lot of, it's staffing intensive. To try to hire 40 plus police officers and have a chain of command. Somebody's got to be in charge, somebody's got to supervise. You have to have a sufficient amount of people to cover the schools and some relief, because invariably somebody's going to have to go to court or somebody's going to be sick. So you have to have the schools covered, because the law says that those trained bodies will be in school. It's a lot of work, and a lot of parents can see that. They see the writing on the wall, and they feel like it's going to be a failure. But it puts the leaders in law enforcement, both myself and the two chiefs of police, in an awkward position, because we can't sit by and allow them to fail. So we have to do all we can to help them succeed. But if it doesn't succeed, then what happens? Everybody looks bad. Clay County looks bad, and that's not a good thing. They're not bound, they as a district are not bound to follow through with that decision on such a short timeline. They'll meet again several times before the beginning of the school year. And if things aren't on track as they want them, or progressing the way that they think they should be, then they always have the option to push the timeline further out, to bring in other law enforcement entities, whether it be the Clay County Sheriff's Office or the municipalities, to perform the functions of school resource officers until such time that they are at a real starting point where they can actually staff a police department up.
So you had mentioned the numbers that Addison Davis, the superintendent of schools, had provided at the school board meeting.
Yes.
In your estimation, how far off are Addison Davis's numbers from what the real startup costs will be?
I have some numbers in front of me, and I'm more than happy to provide those with you. And these are current numbers that I'm using here. For fiscal year 2019 to 2020, the cost for the total SRO program cost, based on current costs, is $4.6 million, or to be exact, $4,648,965. The startup of that from the 2018 to 2019 threshold is an additional $2.5 million. $2.5 million. So, you know, the numbers that I saw for the different options, A, B, C, D, they didn't reflect that. Now, our numbers are different, and I don't think that the superintendent took into account the municipalities and their current involvement, or he used that startup cost of $101,000 and didn't factor in the fact that that was to include capital and a different benefits package. In the following year, those numbers go down because you're not paying for a vehicle, you're not paying for all this equipment, you're just paying for salaries and benefit. So it is a significant decrease. You know, we come in with a number, we're not, I heard a rumor that we're trying to gouge the district. Like, can I speak on that for a minute?
Yes, sir.
So the sheriff's office is not in control of any money that is provided to the district, either the 1 mil increase or money that they get from the state. That's the district's dollars. And so it would be like you, as a homeowner, utilizing the services of a vendor and you paying that vendor. The homeowner is still in charge of the finances of the home. So the district is like the homeowner, and we just are a vendor that provides a service. So we don't control the finances of the district. And any dollars that come to the sheriff's office to underwrite our services, if we don't use those dollars, it goes back to its originator, which is the district. So we don't have any financial dog in the hunt, if you will, you know. So to suggest that, well, the sheriff's office just wants to be in control of the finances, that's somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about. We get a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about, and hence I believe the reason for this interview.
Yes, sir. So would this new police force that would be developed by the school board, would it be accountable to Clay County Sheriff's Office? Like, what about internal affairs? And I mean, we have those kind of incidents arising, and so how do we hold that police force accountable?
They would hold themselves accountable. There would be no oversight from the sheriff's office. They are their own entity. Everything that you see with the sheriff's office would be what you would need to see in the police department. You look at the municipalities, Green Cove Springs, Orange Park, they have their own internal affairs, they have their own dispatchers, they have their own technicians for laptop issues, they have their own, you name it.
Is it necessary to duplicate all these efforts? Is it something that the Clay County Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the other municipalities, could cover, or would that be stretching our other resources too thin?
No, it's not a stretch at all. The only thing that it would mean for the sheriff's office is that we would need to hire a certain amount of deputies to cover that piece. And so what that would look like, because a lot of people are confused when they think about that. They think the sheriff's office is going to hire some individuals who are sworn law enforcement deputies, and that we're going to put those newly hired people in the school system. Well, no, that's not how it works. Those newly hired individuals, they go out to patrol like the traditional law enforcement officer that comes to your mind would do. And we use our current employees, the seasoned employees, typically somewhere between 3 and 5 year mark. That's a good average for somebody to really have the true exposure to law enforcement and be settled enough in this field to be able to be in an environment with our children. That's who we would use.
Have you attempted to reach out to the school district since the meeting?
My reach out to them was attending their meeting and making myself available, and I've always been available. The sheriff's office has always been available. I think we're another stakeholder in this county that's tasked with keeping our kids safe. And you know, I don't know why we weren't pulled in, and that's okay because we didn't have to be pulled in. It's just a prudent person would have. But we're always available, and I said it publicly. I'll say it again. We will do all we can to ensure the success of whatever it is that the district is trying to accomplish to keep our kids safe, because those are our kids as well. The men and women of Clay County Sheriff's Office have kids that are in the school system. And so, I mean, it's self-serving in a sense, but I mean, that's what we're sworn to do, to keep people safe. That's what we're going to do.
So if you were in charge and you could decide how this would go, and being a citizen of Clay County, taxpayer, a resident, a parent, what would you prefer?
I'm kind of biased,
Well,
but I would prefer having an already established, seasoned law enforcement agency use their employees to keep our kids safe, i.e. the Clay County Sheriff's Office, the Green Cove Springs Police Department, and Orange Park Police Department officers. When you look at other entities that have school board police departments, they're struggling to hire. And the people who they are hiring, the majority of those people are retirees, retired law enforcement. They're certified, but they're retired. Well, a lot of people actually retire, not to work some more. So a lot of the other agencies who have police departments, school board police departments, what they're finding is they're woefully understaffed to meet the needs of the legislative mandate. So what they're doing is they're paying sworn deputies from the sheriff's office to come to their schools, and they're paying them at a rate of time and a half, which is more expensive than the original proposal. And where that ends, I have no idea. So with regard to the school board police department, that doesn't exist yet. If that became a reality and they didn't have sufficient numbers to staff up the operation, what do? Do they leave the schools unstaffed? They can't, because the law requires that somebody be there. Then they'd be coming to the sheriff's office and asking for help, and we would provide that help at the cost of time and a half for the person who has to go over there. And that law was put together kind of knee-jerk reaction style, and there's been a finalized report that was sent to the governor, and I've been screaming this from the time that I saw the legislation, and that was a law was created that doesn't have any penalties to it. Well, you can't hold people accountable if they don't comply with the mandates of the law. Well, one of the recommendations that was made to the governor through this report was that harsh sanctions be had for non-compliance, if you will, to include removal from office. That's the recommendation to the governor, which will be funneled to legislation. And if that becomes a reality, and we have a school that isn't covered, that's a violation of the law. So if the law says that there will be harsh sanctions, depends upon what the law says, determine what those harsh sanctions are. Removal from office wouldn't come at the hands of the sheriff, it would come at the hands of the governor, who has already shown that he will remove a sheriff and a superintendent from office if they're not doing their jobs. So that's coming down the pipe. And you know what? I think the community is behind that level of accountability. The taxpayers hired me, and they hired the superintendent to do jobs. They didn't hire me to rework the school system. They didn't hire him to be a police expert. They hired us to do our jobs in our professions. And I'll do all that I can to meet the demands of the taxpayers and the voters who put me in office to keep them and their families safe. And I hope that the superintendent does the same in his line of work. In the spirit of transparency, this is your sheriff's office, and I'm just a steward of your sheriff's office, which rightfully belongs to you. And you have a right to see what numbers were provided, what the actual numbers are, and you can compare and contrast as you see fit. And on the flip side of that, as taxpayers and voters, you have a right to see a comprehensive breakdown of what the numbers look like on the school side. It's your dollars, so you're more than welcome to look at the sheriff's office numbers. It's not anything hidden, and you have more than a right to look at the numbers from the school district.
Well, thank you you, Sheriff Daniels, for your time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.